For decades, it really felt like the world was just getting smaller and smaller. But now, with all the trade wars, the pandemic, all the conflicts, you have to wonder, is that era of globalization actually over? Well, a brand new academic paper gives us a pretty surprising data-driven answer. So let's dive in and see what it tells us about our interconnected world.
All right, so here it is, the big question on everyone's mind. Is globalization really over? I mean, it's a feeling a lot of us have, right? That the basic rules of the global economy are just changing under our feet. To figure out if that gut feeling is right, we've got to look back at the series of shocks that got us to this point.
And it all really kicked off back in 2008, the global financial crisis. That was the first major crack in the whole system. What a painful lesson that was. A housing crisis in just one country almost brought down the entire world economy. It was the first time we all got a really clear look at the huge risks of being that interconnected. Then, after the economic shock, came the political challenges. The rise of protectionism, with the US-China trade war being the most famous example. This was a direct shot at the very idea of globalization. All of a sudden, things like tariffs and my country first economics were back in a big way. And it made everyone start to wonder, is relying this much on global trade really such a good idea? And then, oh yeah, we all remember this one, the COVID-19 pandemic. It was just a body blow to the entire global system. Remember when we couldn't get masks? Or when car companies couldn't get computer chips? All those ships just stuck out at sea for months? It exposed for everyone to see just how fragile our so-called just-in-time global supply chains really were. And to top it all off, recent geopolitical conflicts have just thrown gasoline on the fire. These wars have messed with critical energy and food markets, and they've totally redrawn the map of who's allied with whom. And what that does is it forces countries, and even big companies, to think about more than just the bottom line. Suddenly, it's not just about cost, it's about security and political alliances. Okay, so we've had all these massive shocks, but how do we actually measure the change? I mean, a feeling is one thing, right? But data is something else entirely. The researchers behind this paper knew we needed a new kind of tool, like a global scorecard, to really track this shift. First things first, let's get a key term down, deglobalization. Now, this doesn't mean every country is just building a wall around itself. It's more of a fundamental reversal, a big shift away from that deep global integration and back towards systems that are much more focused on the national level. And to actually measure this, they came up with something pretty cool. It's called the Deglobalization Index, or the D-Index for short. The best way to think about it is like a speedometer for globalization. It doesn't just tell us how fast things are changing, but also what direction are we heading in, towards more connection or pulling further apart. So, how does this thing actually work? Well, it's pretty simple, which is what makes it so smart. The index is basically built on two main pillars. Pillar number one is economic stress. This keeps track of stuff like tariffs, trade wars, financial crises, recessions. You get the idea. Pillar number two is military stress. And that, as you'd guess, measures the impact of conflicts, defense spending, and all that geopolitical tension. You put them together, and you get one single score that tells you how much deglobalization pressure there is in the world. All right, now for the really fascinating part, what happens when you take this index and apply it to the last 35 years of history? Well, the numbers tell a pretty dramatic story about where we've been and maybe, just maybe, where we're going. So the researchers broke down the last 35 years into 7 distinct periods. And just look at the names they gave them on this timeline. They tell a story all by themselves, don't they? You start with all that post-Cold War optimism. You hit this peak they call hyperglobalization. And then, after all those shocks we talked about, we land in what they're calling the Great Fragmentation right now. Okay, let's zoom in on that peak period for a second. That stretch from 1996 to 2000. They call it hyperglobalization. And yeah, that fits. This was the era of China's massive economic rise, when the costs for shipping and communication were just falling through the floor. There was this general feeling that a flat, borderless world wasn't just possible, it was inevitable. And the G-index score for that golden era? Get this, a 0.09, an incredibly low 0.09. On a scale from 0 to 1, that basically means the forces pushing us apart, the deglobalization pressures, were almost zero. The world was stable, it was integrated, and it was moving full steam ahead. This right here, this was our baseline. But, as we all know, that couldn't last forever. After that whole series of shocks we walked through earlier, the financial crisis, the trade wars, the pandemic, the conflicts, the pressure on the system just started to build and build. And that score, it started to climb. And for the period we're in right now, 2021 to 2025, the D-index score has absolutely skyrocketed. It's at 0.77. I mean, just look at that jump, from a peaceful 0.09 all the way up to 0.77. This is not some minor tweak, folks. The data is screaming that this is a historic reversal. We are in a state of high deglobalization. This chart just illustrates the change so perfectly. Just look at what's driving it. Back in the late 90s, you can see both economic and military stress were way down low. Now, today, both of them are through the roof. That military stress pillar in particular is at a 4-decade high. The takeaway is clear. We are living in a fundamentally more fragmented, more contentious world than we were just 25 years ago. So what does this all mean for us, really? If that era of hyper-globalization is truly over, then what's next? Well, the paper argues we're not just heading for total isolation, with every country for itself. No, it's something new, and a whole lot more complicated. And here's really the core idea from their whole analysis. They've given this new era a name: managed interdependence. And that's key. It's not the end of globalization. It's a transformation. It means countries and companies are now being forced to actively manage their global connections, constantly doing this tricky balancing act between the benefits of being open and all those rising risks. So, what does that actually look like on the ground, in the real world? Well, it means we're shifting away from those massive, sprawling global supply chains to ones that are more stable and regional. It means you hear a lot about friendshoring, which is basically just trading more with allies you know you can trust. And here's the big one. For the first time in a long time, things like resilience and security are becoming more important than just finding the absolute cheapest price for something. And this really brings us to the central challenge of our time, doesn't it? We're stuck in this constant balancing act. On one side, you have all the efficiency and low cost that come from being open to the world. And on the other, you have the need for resilience and security that comes from being a bit more self-sufficient. How on earth do we navigate that? Well, the paper actually proposes a kind of 4-part playbook for this new era. First, they say we need to revitalize global institutions, like the WTO, but with more flexible agreements. Second, we've got to strengthen the global financial safety nets through the IMF so we can handle future crises better. Third is a big one: coordinate on security and energy to try and reduce those shocks hitting the system in the first place. And finally, number 4 is to adopt smart domestic policies that build up that resilience we need, but without just slamming the door on the rest of the world. It's a call for smart, strategic management, not just building walls. And so, all of this leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? In this new world of managed interdependence, are we really forced to choose? Do we have to pick between the low costs and amazing innovation that globalization gave us and the stability and security that we all now desperately want? Or is there a way to find a new balance, a way to get the best of both worlds? Honestly, the answer to that question is probably going to define the rest of our century.